In 2003, archaeologists excavating a cave on a remote Indonesian island pulled a skeleton from the ground. 3 feet, 3 inches tall, brain the size of a chimpanzee's, dead for roughly 18,000 years. The bones weren't ancient enough to be a primitive hominin. They weren't deformed enough to be a diseased modern human. They were something else entirely. A separate species that nobody knew existed, living on the same planet as us until roughly the moment agriculture began. Scientists named it Homo floresiensis. The press immediately called it the Hobbit. The nickname stuck because the description fit. Small, cave-dwelling, tool-using, fire-building humanoids on an isolated island. Real, documented, and extinct. Officially extinct. The island's indigenous population has a name for them too. The Lineage people of central Flores have been telling the same story for generations. Hairy, human-like creatures that raided villages, communicated in a language nobody could understand, and were driven into a cave and killed several hundred years ago. Not 50,000 or 18,000. The fossil record says they disappeared when modern humans arrived. The oral tradition says a surviving population was still interacting with human villages within living memory of the 18th century. One of those accounts has physical evidence. The other has never been formally investigated. Here is everything science actually knows, and what it refuses to ask. The Liang Bua cave skeleton, designated LB1, nicknamed Flo, upended paleoanthropology the moment the dating came back. Adults averaged 1 meter in height. Cranial capacity measured 380 to 430 cubic centimeters, a third of modern human volume, comparable to a chimpanzee, smaller than any member of the genus Homo previously documented, surviving past 300,000 years ago. The bones themselves were structurally distinct from modern humans in multiple ways. Thick cortical walls, wrist architecture matching early hominins rather than Homo sapiens, shoulder joints oriented differently, foot proportions unlike anything in the human fossil record. This was not a pygmy, not a diseased individual. A population, multiple specimens recovered across different excavation seasons, of a genuinely separate species. The archaeological context inside Liang Bua made the brain size impossible to dismiss as primitive incapability. Stone tools. Worked flakes up to 12 centimeters long, struck with precision requiring motor control, and planning that a 400cc brain shouldn't theoretically support. Cut marks on stegodon bones, a dwarf elephant species weighing several hundred kilograms, indicating systematic butchering. Charred bone fragments and ash deposits consistent with controlled fire. Coordinated hunting of large prey. Tool making. Fire management. A species the size of a 5-year-old child was doing things that require social organization, shared knowledge transmission, and forward planning, with cognitive hardware that mainstream neuroscience would predict couldn't support any of it. The endocast provided a partial answer. Internal skull impressions revealed a disproportionately large frontal lobe relative to total brain volume. The region governing planning, social coordination, and abstract reasoning. The brain wasn't simply shrunken. Its architecture had been reorganized, compressing function into reduced volume in ways that partially explain the behavioral record. The origin of H. Floresiensis remains one of the most actively contested questions in paleoanthropology. The dominant hypothesis for 2 decades, island dwarfism applied to Homo erectus. A population reached Flores roughly 1 million years ago, became geographically isolated, and shrank over generations as reduced food availability selected for lower metabolic requirements. The island rule, well documented across dozens of mammal species, predicts exactly this outcome. A 2024 paper in Nature Communications complicated the model significantly. Researchers analyzed additional hominin fossils from Mata Menge, a site on Flores predating Liang Bua by approximately 700,000 years. An adult humerus recovered there was 9 to 16% shorter and thinner than the already small Liang Bua specimens, meaning the ancestral population arriving on Flores was smaller than the later Floresiensis individuals. Island dwarfism works in the opposite direction. You start large and shrink. The Mata Menge data suggests the ancestor was already diminutive before isolation, which points away from H. erectus and towards something older, smaller, and less well documented in Southeast Asian fossil record. The alternative, a previously unknown hominin lineage, potentially related to Homo habilis or an even earlier branch, reached the island through a migration no existing fossil evidence accounts for. A brain the size of a chimpanzee's was making tools, managing fire, and hunting animals 3 times its body weight. The origin question is still open, and the oral record suggests the extinction date is wrong by tens of thousands of years. Subscribe. Things that shouldn't exist follows the evidence wherever it leads. The Naj people of central Flores call them Ebu Gogo, roughly translated as grandmother who eats everything. The description is consistent across generations of oral tradition, standing no taller than a child, covered in body hair, pot-bellied, with slightly protruding ears, long arms, and an awkward but fast gait. They communicated in a language Flores villagers couldn't interpret, sometimes described as a rapid murmuring, occasionally as mimicry of human speech without comprehension. They lived in caves, stole food, root vegetables, crops, sometimes infants. They were regarded as dangerous but not aggressive in the way predators are, opportunistic and persistent. Villagers, fed up with repeated theft, offered the Ibu Gogo palm fiber as a gift. When the creatures carried it into their cave, the villagers threw in a burning brand. The fire killed the occupants. According to the oral record, survivors fled west, toward the coast, toward Liang Bua, and were not seen again. Researchers at Aeon and in academic anthropology literature have noted the directional detail is striking. The fleeing survivors headed specifically toward the cave where the fossil specimens were later excavated. Whether that's meaningful coincidence or genuine geographic memory preserved across generations is unresolved. Flores is remote, ecologically isolated. The interior remains difficult terrain. A small population of a cave-dwelling, forest-adapted species in an island interior wouldn't necessarily leave a fossil record that anyone has excavated. No confirmed modern specimen of H. Floresiensis exists. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, a principle the coelacanth demonstrated in the most direct way possible. What the Ebu Gogo tradition represents, at minimum, is a population of Flores islanders describing an encounter with something matching the skeletal profile of a species science classified as extinct, in a tradition documented before that classification was public knowledge. A species with a chimpanzee-sized brain was making precision stone tools, managing fire, and executing coordinated hunts of prey animals several times its body weight on an island nobody knew it existed on until 2003. Its origin remains contested. The 2024 Mata Menge analysis broke the H. Erectus dwarfism model and left the ancestral question genuinely open. The official extinction date is 50,000 years ago. The oral tradition of the people who lived on the same island places the last encounter in the 18th century. That tradition was documented before the fossil discovery made it culturally useful to invent. The direction the fleeing survivors were described as heading. The oral record places them moving toward Liang Bua, where the bones were found. The question isn't whether Homo floresiensis could have survived in a remote island interior into historical times. The question is whether anyone has seriously looked. Drop a comment. Does the pre-2003 documentation of the Ebu Gogo description close the argument for you, or do you need a physical specimen? Because that's the one thing nobody has gone looking for with modern search methodology. Next week on Things That Shouldn't Exist, the Voynich manuscript, a 15th century illustrated book in an undeciphered language. A 2026 computational analysis identified grammatical structures that make the hoax hypothesis mathematically untenable. The botanical illustrations don't match any plant species on Earth. Here's what the data shows. Subscribe. I'll see you there.